So this beautifully hanging basket plant with some really cool shaped leaves is known as Curio herreanus, and curio essentially means a little bit more of a curiosity. And this has been recently placed into that genus along with the string of beads, which actually this also has the same common name, as well as string of teardrops, string of raindrops, and a number of other things that I can't think of off the top of my head. And is also in the same genus now as string of bananas. So those all used to be put into Senecio. So that's how we knew those, Senecio rayulanus, Senecio radicans. This was Senecio herreanus, but now it's Curio herreanus. So you probably won't see that change over or switch over into growers because, again, it's so hard to keep up with some of these changes in the binomial nomenclature. As a matter of fact, with the string of beads, which was known as Senecio rayulanus, I also knew it as Clinia rayulana. So initially, I think when I probably filmed the string of beads, I said Clinia, and now it's all in Curio. So usually anything string of something or others is going to be put into Curio, and they all kind of have these really dainty succulent strings and then these kind of cool shaped succulent leaves, as you could see here. And if I, show you a little bit more up close, let me try to find one of these longer ones so I could pull it up. You could see just the unique little shape of these succulent leaves. Now, this plant actually causes a lot of challenges for people, and sometimes our indoor environments are actually challenged to begin with. So for instance, if you're not giving this top-down light, or your light is not angling in with the sun, then a lot of these green beads, if you will, or these leaves, will actually just start to put leaves down here, and it'll get a little bald on top. So ways that you could actually work around that is by taking little stem cuttings, and being able to kind of like do it like hair plugs up on top again. But you're going to be constantly doing that unless you're able to change your lighting regime. And with all of these curios, even though I have some pulled away from my southwest facing window, they can get really intense light. And you can grow them in full sun, but you got to be really mindful of it. They would prefer a little bit more light, but bright light, but indirect bright light, or if it's a direct bright light, they're not getting it as like a full sun. So, some of that hot afternoon sun could be really intense for these plants, and they could actually dry very easily. And if it's not getting enough water into its leaves that, some of these leaflets, which I'll again show you, will actually start to pucker. And I don't really have any puckered leaves here, I don't think, to be able to show you, but these will start to just kind of like wrinkle a little bit. And if you're overwatering these plants, they will actually bust. So like a pea, if you apply too much water or pressure, it'll just kind of burst a little bit, and then you'll start to see cracks in the leaflets. So you want to be a little bit more mindful of that. But again, if you're not giving it the most optimum light, which again is so hard to do unless maybe you have a grow light that's being regulated on the plant, then it might just end up putting its green leaves elsewhere. Like I have a Curio radicans, one of the string of bananas, and it's putting most of its green leaves down here. Same thing with my string of beads, which is my Curio rayulanus. It's a little bit bald on top, but it's got a really beautiful flush of green down below. So, you just have to go with it because of the interior environment that you have. However, one thing I should say about all of these plants is that they are very, very easy to overwater. You have to go very light on the watering. And if you're going to repot these, which I would recommend, you could keep them in the grower's pot, but like most of the grower's pots that I see are plastic. I don't really like to have a lot of plastic in my house. I don't think it looks that great, but you could remove it out of the plastic almost immediately when you get it from the grower, because that's when it's probably the strongest. And you want to move that out. You want to put it into a regular planter pot. You could even do maybe a terracotta pot so the moisture kind of wicks away more easily, because roots are very sensitive to this plant, especially if you don't have a lot of airflow and you're letting the water kind of sit in this kind of peaty mixture, if you will. Then that's a surefire way in order to be able to rot the plant. So you got to be very, very mindful when you're watering it. And in the winter months, I'm sparingly watering it. So, just be careful, because that's probably one of the ways that this plant easily fails. One of the other fancy things I should tell you about is the flowers. So you can see some of them are just at the tail end. This is probably the freshest flower that I could show you. And you'll see that it's like this little white pom-pom with some red and yellow bits kind of coming out of it. And if you smell it, that's really nice. This smells like cloves and cinnamon. I mean, it just reminds me of the holidays. It's so lovely. So even though these little composite flowers are fairly insignificant, you know, they're nothing to cry home to mom about, but the smell is actually pretty remarkable. You know, I mean, I think one of the few things is like you could go to Hoya blooms and a lot of them smell various different ways, but this one is guaranteed to smell like cloves and cinnamon and Christmas all over again. So that's also very nice. They usually flower for me during the late fall and the early winter months. So that's something to actually really look forward to. And they keep their blooms for a long time. So you can see they just kind of dry off. And you could deadhead them if you want. Deadhead essentially just means cutting off the stalks of the flowers. Whether that will allow them to rebloom again, I really am not certain. But I think that if you just don't want the blooms kind of falling off, or if you think it looks a little shaggy or unkempt, then you could just remove them. Now, I didn't actually say where this plant is from, but it is from Namibia. And I think the other ones are from the Cape Provinces area, so just around that same area within Africa. And you can imagine that these are kind of crawling over, you know, kind of the ground. And actually, that's one of the good ways that you could propagate these, if I didn't say that already, is by cutting off the stems, and then the little roots will form at the ends of nodes. So you could actually remove some of these little teardrops, and then you could actually stick them back in the top, or you could propagate them in some other place. Now, fertilizing is not that important for these plants. I mean, you could get away with something maybe on a quarterly basis, but during the growing season, so you're maybe only going to be doing it 3 times a year. And maybe that's a 011 or a 247 or a 347. Maybe giving it some micronutrients now and again will also be very good. But these aren't super heavy feeders. However, they do grow a little bit more. So if you're seeing something that's looking a little like, you know, not up to the optimum levels that you would want, then I would say you could increase the fertilizing. So if you're doing it on a quarterly basis, maybe you're upping it to a bi-monthly basis. And you just have to pay attention to your plant. I mean, again, these are really beautiful ones. If you have like a western exposure or southern exposure, maybe pulled away. And of course, I'm in the Northeast, so that means something different than if you're on the equator or if you're towards the south. But they do want that kind of like bright light. Shade it from some of those full sun, however, because like I said, it will dry it out. And as far as pest pressures go, for this plant, I haven't had any problems. I will say, because I'm subjecting one of my string of bananas to a little bit more of a fuller sun condition, it does get spider mites from now and again, but I have to tell you, those spider mites do not kill the plant, especially because I stay on top of it a little bit. So you got to be a little bit more mindful maybe of that. I think it's quite unusual to get a little spider mites on succulents. I think it's just the case that I have to move mine back a little bit more. But otherwise, really great plant to grow, very beautiful. And again, don't fret if it starts to bald a little bit on top.